Men, what are some less obvious red flags about men you would want to caution women against? Story 1. When he looks to you as his sole source of happiness and entertainment. This usually means that they lack the ability to manage their own emotions or have healthy coping mechanisms. In addition, if you're in it for the long term, there will be times that you will get sick of each other, and a guy needs some hobbies that can take his attention away to give you space. This can be an open door for manipulation. My husband always tells me I'm his entire life. Any moment when he's not at work, he wants to be with me. He has no friends. When we were dating, I thought it was so refreshing to have a man put me first and be obsessed with me. After being married for a few years, I am suffocating. He blames me for absolutely every problem since I'm the only person he interacts with outside of work. Oof. I know that feeling. My ex-wife did this. My entire life had to revolve around her, and that's never how I lived my life. For instance, the guys and I used to go to a football game and our crosstown classic every year, but she always said she wanted to go. Tried to negotiate with her. Time with the guys is time with the guys. But we can go to a different game. Wasn't good enough. Didn't understand this was a thing we did as the boys' way before she entered the picture. No significant others or spouses ever came. If they did, then yeah, I'd have wanted her to come. When I tried to plan an alternate thing, she never wanted to go. Truthfully, I always believe that in a relationship, I want to be a big part of someone's life, but not their entire life. Thankfully, my current girlfriend and I have the same beliefs. I love being around her, but I'd never want her to give up her independence for me. We spoke long and hard about it, and we both agreed that we gotta respect plans we make together and in our own previous social circles. Truthfully, I can't wait to live with this woman and have her come home after a night out with the gals with a home-cooked meal waiting for her and for her to tell me about her day. It's something I hope happens. Story 2. When you have to cater to his needs and wants over your own with no compromise. It can be something as only watching shows that he wants, or doing things only he wants to do, or ordering takeout that only he likes. Oh, this makes me think of a man I was seeing, and we went to the mall together, and I went into about 7 different stores he wanted to go into. Sports stores, video game stores, comic stores. I finally found a store I'd like to go into, and not even 5 minutes in, he says, "Come on, we're leaving." Man, just ordering me to do as he says was enough. But I couldn't believe that I couldn't be in one store I liked for not even a couple minutes. I had one just like this. We were once in a game shop for 45 minutes. I don't play games and have no interest in it, but he loved it. So I tried to be interested and didn't complain, asked questions, etc. We then went to a shop where I needed to buy stuff, and he flat out refused to even enter. I pointed out we just did almost an hour in the other shop, and he screeched like a toddler, "You can't force me to like this stuff," gesturing wildly at the shop. We got stared at a lot. I went in alone while he sulked outside. Reader, that shop was the supermarket. We needed food. He also couldn't be forced to cook, do his laundry, tidy up, etc. He'd spend hours washing, waxing, and vacuuming his car, a crappy old Volkswagen, not the cool retro kind, the crappy kind, and he considered that a household chore. Car wasn't a household vehicle, though. That was his alone. I was only allowed in if I put bin bag on the floor so my shoes wouldn't ruin it, as if I'd make sure to walk through a 6-foot pile of dog crap every time I left the house. Food shopping wasn't allowed in the boot in case something spills, so he always refused to pick me up afterwards. Great, well-adjusted, responsible adult that he was. Story 3. Any aversion to taking responsibility. The older I get, the more I find that the men I respect most aren't the ones with great achievements to their names, but rather the ones who aren't afraid to own their stuff. I considered it a great disappointment when the government department I worked for stopped allowing people to own and follow through on customer issues. Previously, you could run into a problem, tell the member of the public, usually, "I will fix that," and you would become the hub for that issue, even if you had to contact 3 or 4 other people with higher level authority to actually fix the thing. Whoever the customer spoke with first, they could keep speaking with them on follow-ups, and that same person would be in the loop and pushing the agenda. After that was dropped, we ended up with the old stereotype of customers being forwarded from one person to another, often going around in loops, with no one actually ever taking responsibility for getting the issue resolved. What was the rationale for the change, if it was communicated to you? The idea for these changes is normally that there won't be a single person causing a bottleneck. Any person can address any issue as they come in. However, I find it normally works to diffuse responsibility and ownership of issues while causing frustration. If you deal with someone new every time, you not only feel less connected, but you have to go through the same explanations every single time. I work for a pretty big company, and my boss, our CEO, is pretty much one of those richy rich guys you can see on Forbes 30 Under 30. But one thing I really like about him as a person is that he apologizes when he messes up. He's also not afraid to say sorry, and he takes responsibility when he does stuff. I know this is a bare minimum, but I've met a good amount of privileged people, and I notice that most of the time, because they have a lot of money, they try to avoid owning up their stuff. Story 4. Don't trust a man who can joke about others but can't take it. Edit. I know that this can apply to women. The thing is, I shouldn't need a disclaimer just to gain permission to critique men, and some of you shouldn't need to drag women down just to acknowledge a personality flaw. This bugs the crap out of me, even outside of the dating world. We've had the same group of like 10 friends since high school, and even 20 years later, there's that one guy we wish we would just loosen up. I worked with a guy who loved to take the mickey out of others. Within days of working there, he was talking crap about people behind their backs, while the rest of us at the shop just kind of tolerated it. Eventually, the day came where he proved his thin skin. We had a big pizza box, and we all drew caricatures of each other on it. The shortest guy in the shop was drawn absurdly small. Someone drew me with an afro, poking fun at me being bald. He drew one guy with an enormous nose. It was a car shop, so talking crap was the norm there. Everyone was in on it, so everyone was cool with it. Or at least should have been. So I joined in and drew this guy as a donut, because he was grotesquely overweight and ate donuts literally the entire day. He blew a gasket over it, tried to call my new place of employment to get me fired over it, and threatened me if I was ever to do it again. He then jumped in his truck and drove circles around the parking lot before leaving on a 2-hour lunch break. People who can't take it but love to dish it are the worst. The worst! Story 5. Many men only know how to relationship flirt. They will say things like, "I'm looking for something long-term," when really they just want to hook up. My best friend entered the dating pool after being in a relationship for a long time. She only wanted to hook up for a while and was open about it up front, even before the actual date. There were still guys insistent on wanting a relationship with her, and once they'd won her over, not at the same time, and both times it took a while, they immediately dropped her. One even confessed to already having a girlfriend and pretended to want a relationship to make chicks DTF. Like, why would you even continue to push these narratives in this case? I freaking hated that back when I was still dating. Just freaking be honest. I had no issues with just hooking up, but don't lie to me. In my dating days, I always had way more respect for a man that could be honest about wanting a hookup and didn't try to butter me up with sugary lies first. The relationship flirters are so skeezy and exactly the reason the word frick boy exists. When I was single, I had a few friends with benefits I would see every now and then. I was hooking up with a new girl and told her that I wasn't looking for anything exclusive or serious, and she wasn't the only girl I was hooking up with. She paused for a second and told me that she normally doesn't like that type of situation, but because I was honest about it from the get-go, she was willing to give it a shot. Story 6. I'm coming in late, but this is something I've tried to teach all my daughters. Men will show you how they feel with their actions. If they say they care but don't put in the effort, listen to the actions, not the words. Good advice for dating, but also good advice for life, really. My last situation had this issue, and he would say things but wouldn't back them up with his actions. No matter how many times I told him, those actions are way greater than words. He never seemed to understand the importance. He's not in my life anymore. Not a trauma dump about that BS, but a big thing was I told him again and again that it seemed like he only cared about doing it with me. He insisted that it wasn't true, but after the first time we slept together, all he wanted to do together was go back and screw. And no from me would still end up with us sleeping together. Like, I just wanted to lay together and talk about our days, or watch something and have physical comfort. But all he could think about and talk about when we were in bed together was how horny he was and wanting to be inside me. Tell me you only care about sleeping with me without telling me you only care about sleeping with me. Story 7. If he doesn't want to talk about awkward stuff while you're dating, then he might not want to talk about awkward problems in the relationship. Edit. It's interesting how people make their own interpretation of things. I never gave any definition of awkward, nor did I specify any timelines. But some folks seem to cherry-pick the definitions they want, so they can discount this. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the core concept. If you're dating someone and they have stinky socks that they leave around instead of going into the laundry, that's an awkward topic. If one person talks about how much they want to be a parent to their own biological kids, and the other knows they don't want children, that's an awkward topic. Humans do tend to try to avoid stuff that makes them uncomfortable or scares them. We tend to hope problems will go away if we leave them alone. I've talked to a lot of friends who got divorced who thought their partner would change after marriage. You don't need to give your intimate autobiography for a first date, but if you see an obvious issue, like the children example, there's no point in waiting a while to point it out. Story 8. So about his last 3 relationships and why they ended. If it's always the girl who's crazy, it's him. He's crazy. I briefly dated a guy who told me that 4 of his ex-girlfriends had restraining orders against him, and they were all crazy. I told him that I didn't want to see him anymore, and he was genuinely surprised and asked why. I said, well, either you're the problem, or you have very bad judgment and skills in choosing partners, and neither of those is okay. Then he texted me, maybe I should start thinking about murder. Pretty terrifying. Glad I got out so early. I always get a bit uncomfortable about the all my exes are crazy because I don't have the best history with exes. But then I remember that I actually own up to having a past with low self-esteem that made it hard for me to want healthy partners. So, in other words, even though my exes weren't the best dating material, it was still on me. Story 9. If you hear a little voice inside your head that says, I can change this man, he is not the man for you. My mom taught us, don't worry if a guy dresses like a dork. That is one thing you can change. But make sure he's good on the inside. You can't change that. I'm colorblind. If it wasn't for my wife, my outfits would all be messed up. Years ago, I was leaving for work one morning, and as I'm walking out the door, she started yelling, whoa, 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 what are you doing? What? You're wearing green pants and a purple shirt. You look like the Joker. That's why I'm a grown man who still goes to my mom for fashion advice. I'm colorblind. She catches when something I look at doesn't match or is not the color I thought it was. And it helps that she actually had good fashion sense. Story 10. If he's dumb but thinks he's smart. Yep, a smart person is one who isn't afraid to say, I don't know. Then let's look that up. Made me feel like a genius just now. I usually say I don't know enough about the subject to make an opinion, but I'll look into it. I was taught this years ago and tried to use it in a job interview that I was wildly underqualified for. I was looking for my first job in HR, and this company interviewed me to be their entire HR department. I didn't know the scope of the role until the interview. They asked me how I would approach a task, and I said, I've never come across it in practice, but I am very diligent in carrying out research and finding solutions to answers that I don't have. Basically told them they could Google anything they needed HR for. I didn't get the job. Story 11. A green flag to look for is long-term friendships. Long-term friends require good communication skills and emotional intelligence. It's also a pretty good indicator that they're willing to compromise for someone else's emotional needs. I dated a guy who introduced me to his closest friends after about 3 months. I mean, that is a considerable good time, I guess. Normal? While we were in a relationship, I noticed he rarely called them or talked to them. Then after we broke up, I actually stayed in touch with some of his best friends. We became real good friends, and they'd tell me, yeah, he never really talked to any of us, like for a long time. And some of them were like, Yeah, he's kind of a weird guy. When I asked them why the heck he introduced them as his best friends, they were as confused as I was. What the F? Story 12. As someone who is very guilty of this, focusing a ton on you and your needs, but hardly paying attention to their own. Someone like this can come across as sweet, selfless, and caring, but they're actually avoiding their own problems to focus on yours. You're not a partner to them, you're a distraction, and even they themselves may not realize it. Yep, this is me in a relationship. It's why I'm not dating right now, so I can figure out my own stuff. It's weird when people are like, you're always happier when you're in a relationship and stuff. Like, yeah, sure, but I gotta learn to be happy when I'm not in one, because it's not worth trying to be in a relationship if I can't be happy outside of one. Gotta learn to give myself the love I'm willing to give to other people. Story 13. If he starts throwing tantrums over petty things, there is worse on the horizon. He's not passionate, he's unstable. I broke up with my ex because he had a full-on tantrum because of a board game. They were playing Civilization. He declared a truce with another player, went on to aggressively attack the other players, then completely freaked out because the player he had a truce with spent turns building up and then attacked him while he was overcommitted on the board. He legit tried to throw the guy out of the game store that he, my ex, no longer worked for and ban him for life. I was grateful because it finally opened my eyes as to what a freaking child he was. Story 14. When someone is declaring multiple times they are not a certain way without a prompt, they are actually that way. I'm a nice guy. Repeat several times in the first few dates. Narrator. He was in fact not a nice guy. Some would even go so far as to describe him as an asshole. Also, the opposite. If they're claiming unprompted that they are a certain way, they probably aren't that way. For example, I am an empath. Proceeds to suck all the air out of the room by talking incessantly about themselves. Story 15. This goes for both genders, but don't date someone under the assumption that they'll change something fundamental about themselves. Not fair to either of you. Many moons ago, the first girl I ever dated, remember thinking, I love this girl, and it would be perfect if I only inserted several fundamental qualities about her that were not compatible with me. Of course, it didn't work out. Then I repeated that mistake about 6 more times. On the 7th long-term relationship, I remember not being able to come up with anything I would change. We've been together for 10 years, married for 5. She's amazing and perfect. I still wouldn't change a thing. Story 16. If a guy is doing the minimum of what you want in a long-term relationship at the beginning, it's going to be well below your standards after a few years. I would expect about half of what you see in the first year. Yes, Mom told me 30 years ago that marriage doesn't make your relationship better. This is as good as it's ever going to be. Can you be happy if this is the peak? I realized that, no, I didn't want to mother a grown man. I wanted an equal partner. Best decision ever. No shade on his character, just not the match for either of us. Story 17. This one is extremely obvious, yet I've seen dozens of women still make the same mistake. If he's rude, selfish, and possessive before you're dating, he will not change once you start dating. I don't know why so many women think that a man will have an epiphany and become better once they get in a relationship. People very rarely change. If anything, I would say he would be on his best behavior when you first meet, which means that his behavior is only going to be at best stay the same or get worse. Story 18. If anything happens to him and he always shifts blame to someone else or something else or the situation, that is a big red flag. Sooner or later, everything will be your fault. Also, if their story, complaint, rant, or explanation sounds too one-sided, again, unable to take blame themselves, they are lacking empathy. Red flag. Yeah, I call these guys Calamity Johns, as women would of course be Calamity Janes. Story 19. A friend of mine dated a guy who apparently everyone wanted to fight. At the gym, this guy over here wants to throw down. At a mall, those guys look like they want to get hit. At the grocery store, this dude is looking at me like he wants to go outside. No, Steve, no one feels like fighting you. You are just on steroids. I don't know, openly wishing for violence seems pretty obvious. Story 20. Blaming their childhood on treating you and others like rubbish. Had an ex that would always blame his exes for why they went wrong, and went as far as calling his recent ex a slit because she would want him to watch their son to have me time. I ignored so many red flags from that dude. Crazy. Story 21. When they don't respect the word no, even in the most benign of circumstances. Yes, this is incredibly important. As above, so below. Most people are nice enough to be consistent with their personalities. How they act with little stuff is how they will act with big stuff. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. Story 22. Don't ever be fooled by how a man treats you. Look at how he treats unattractive women and other men. This is actually one of the best pieces of advice here. People keep mentioning being rude to servers, but if the server is attractive, then being nice doesn't mean much. Story 23. You'll be able to tell if a guy is nice by how he behaves. If a guy tells you he's nice, ignore that. That's meaningless. That's like calling yourself a rad dude. Most certainly you are not. Unless you have that healthy radioactive glow. Story 24. If they verbally attack you in an argument rather than discuss the issue, if they constantly crap talk other guys, or talk crap about all your friends, Jesus, it took me 7 years to finally figure out he isolated me. Story 25. If he isn't on the same level of maturity as you, regardless of age, don't go for it. One of you will turn into a parent. Story 26. If they behave like they know everything, change is certainly not their cup of tea. Story 27. If he mentions that he's a nice guy every few sentences, stay away from him. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.